Caleb Ironwood pulled the reins about to turn back when a scene stopped him in his tracks. 5 wooden poles standing alone in the middle of the field, each one with a body hanging upside down, swaying in the hot wind. He squinted. They were not corpses, they were women. Apache Caleb spurred his horse forward. The sight before him made his chest tighten like it was being crushed. 5 young women tied upside down by thick ropes, wrapped tightly around their ankles. Blood from their scraped wrists dripped onto the scorching sand. Their hair hung loose, half covering their faces, which were burning under the relentless sun. The youngest, the smallest one, was barely conscious, her breath nearly gone. Through the sound of the dry, burning wind and the cawing of crows overhead, a hoarse voice rose up. The eldest Nieli was still trying to lift her head, even as the blood pooling in her face turned it purple. Her dark eyes locked onto Caleb's, clinging to the last shred of hope she had. "Please," she gasped, her breath shallow and broken, "save us. I will bear your child. You can plant your seed in me every day. Just save my sisters." Caleb froze. He had heard many desperate pleas before, but nothing like this. This was not a seduction. This was the voice of a sister willing to sacrifice herself so the others could live. His jaw clenched. He did not need to think twice. Caleb drew his knife and cut down the youngest first, then the second, then the third, the fourth. The sun scorched his back, but he did not stop until Nieli fell into his arms, trembling. "You are safe now," Caleb said, his voice steady and low. "No one is going to die here today." Caleb laid Nieli down gently on the dry grass beside his horse, then turned back to carry Sunni, the youngest, first. Her frail body was so light. He felt as if one more gust of wind might carry her away. The other 4 sisters lay limp in the narrow shade cast by the wooden poles, each of them marked with deep bruises from being suspended upside down for too long. Caleb was no young man anymore, but every movement he made was swift and sure, driven by the instinct of someone who had once carried his wife through wave after wave of fever. Though his wife had not survived in the end, the helplessness had haunted him for years. He would not let these young women die hanging in silence. He carried them one by one on horseback. 3 trips through blistering heat that felt like fire on his skin. Only when all of them were finally lying in the shade beside his barn did Caleb feel the dizziness of dehydration hit him. But he did not stop. He poured water into his hand and let it drip gently onto their lips, afraid that giving too much too fast might send their bodies into shock. Sunni drank a few drops and immediately clutched at his hand. Alohi and Kiana gasped for air like swimmers breaking the surface. Tella was still unconscious. Nieli opened her eyes, but could not speak, her breath heavy like stones pressed against her chest. Only now did Caleb have a moment to really look at the eldest sister. Her long black hair was tangled and wild, her cheeks swollen from the blood rushing to her face while she was hung upside down. But her eyes, tired and bloodshot still, held a rare light, the gaze of someone who had stood at death's door and still tried to hold on to life for others. Caleb dipped a cloth in cold water and laid it gently across her forehead. As Nieli's breathing began to steady, she whispered softly, "What I said out there." Caleb shook his head, cutting her off at once. "Forget it. You said it to save your sisters. I understand." Nieli tried to swallow her shame, feeling exposed in front of this stranger. But then Caleb spoke words that left her stunned. "No one here has to pay with their body to live. Not with me." That simple sentence silenced all 5 Apache sisters, girls who had grown up in a world where town men treated them like property. The whole moment seemed to slow, as if the air itself was listening. Caleb kept working, tending to each of them, wrapping wounds, checking pulses, shielding them from the sun. And never once did his eyes carry the look of a man who thought he owned them. Nieli, exhausted as she was, felt the corners of her eyes burn. For the first time in their lives, a man had come not to take something from them, but to return what had been stolen, the right to live as human beings. 3 days passed at the Ironwood Ranch, like time drifting between 2 worlds. On one side, the blazing desert sun. On the other, the gentle warmth of the man whose hands had pulled them back from death hanging in that open field. Caleb cared for the 5 Apache sisters as if they were his own family, cooking porridge, helping them sit up, cleaning their wounds, and every night lighting a lamp to keep watch in case a fever returned. He did it all in silence, with a kindness so rare that Neely never imagined she would ever feel it in her lifetime. Suni, the youngest, had started smiling again. Although he and Kiana could take a few steps now, Tala, still stubborn as ever, insisted on helping out in the stable, even though she could barely stand. Only Neely had yet to recover fully. Her shoulders and back hurt so badly that even the smallest movement made her breath catch. One afternoon, as sunlight poured through the window in thin golden ribbons, Caleb stepped into the room to change her bandages. Neely was sitting up against the wall, her eyes following his every move, steady, gentle, with not even a flicker of desire or demand. As he tied the last knot on her bandage, Neely spoke softly. "Caleb, that day in the field, when I said those words, I thought I was going to die. I just wanted my sisters to live." Caleb sat down, meeting her gaze. "I know, and you owe me nothing." A quiet pause filled the room. Neely clutched the blanket as if wrestling with something deep inside. Then she looked up, her dark eyes clear and unwavering. "But today, I want to say those words again. Not out of fear, not to repay a debt, but because I want to choose." Caleb froze. Neely continued, her voice quiet, but sure. "My whole life, men from town have always taken what they believed belonged to them. But you saved me without taking anything, and that is why." She reached out and took his hand. A simple gesture, but one that nearly took the air from his lungs. "Caleb Ironwood, if you want me, I am yours willingly, with my own choice." Caleb could hear the pounding of his own heart, but he placed his hand on her shoulder and said, voice deep and steady, I do not want to touch you while you are still weak, and I will never touch you just because you think you owe me something." Neely smiled, light as a breeze for the first time. "This is not a debt. This is a decision, from a woman who finally gets to choose." And in that moment, Caleb understood love does not come from promises made in desperation, but from the strength of a woman who rises from death and chooses herself again. News of the 5 Apache sisters disappearing from the dry field spread faster than desert wind, and Morgan Wade, the man who held life and death in his hands around these parts, completely lost his mind. When he found out his merchandise had vanished just a day before he planned to sell them to the biggest saloon in town, he roared at his men. "No one hides them from me. Search every field, every valley. I want those girls back, dead or alive." That night, when the moon hung like a sliver of a blade in the sky, Caleb was building a fire outside when the sound of horses thundered in from the distance. Red dust curled into the air beneath the moonlight. Caleb stood, his eyes sharpening. He had known this day would come, and he had prepared for it. Silently, he stepped back into the house, checked the locks, and looked over the 5 sisters sleeping. Neely still rested against the wall, her face tensing slightly as the scent of horse dust reached her. "Is it him?" she asked. Caleb nodded. "But we are not running. Not tonight." Because on that very first night, when Neely was still half-conscious, Caleb had already sent a telegram to Sheriff Allen. "There are 5 Apache women being held and tortured. Morgan Wade may be behind it. Please come investigate immediately." Outside, the horses screamed. Torches flared to life. More than a dozen of Wade's men surrounded the ranch like a pack of hungry wolves. Wade sat on his black horse. A wicked smile stretched across his face in the firelight. "Caleb Ironwood," he bellowed. "Hand them over. They belong to me." Caleb stepped out onto the porch, a Winchester in his hand. Barr held down a stance not of aggression, but of protection. "They do not belong to anyone," Caleb said, voice low but firm. "They are free people." Wade let out a cruel laugh. "Free? Apache? Do not be stupid. I bought them from their father before he died. They owe me. And you are not big enough to stand against me." The moment Wade urged his horse forward, the sound of a police whistle shattered the night. 20 town deputies appeared from the west, weapons drawn. Sheriff Allen rode at the front, pointing directly at Wade. "Morgan Wade, you are under arrest for kidnapping, torture, and trafficking of human beings." Wade's men panicked. Wade spun his horse to flee, but a warning shot froze him in place. Niali stood behind the window and watched it unfold, her heart swelling with a feeling she had never known before. For the first time in her life, a man stood between her and evil, not for profit, but for what was right. Wade was cuffed in the middle of Caleb's yard, his face pressed into the dusty ground. Caleb came back inside and found Niali trembling slightly. "It is over," he said softly. "No one is ever going to hurt you again." And for the first time since the day she was hung from a wooden post, Niali felt truly safe. "Thank you so much for being here." The next morning, just as the sun peeked over the Dragoon Mountains, Sheriff Allen returned to Caleb's ranch. In his hands was a stack of worn papers stamped in red with the seal of the territorial court. Caleb stood on the porch, and Niali sat by the window. Her 4 younger sisters gathered around her. Allen spoke slowly, each word peeling away the invisible chains that had bound the girls for years. "We searched Morgan Wade's storage. All the debt contracts tied to your tribe. They were forgeries. Not a single one is legally valid." Although he choked up. "So we do not owe him anything?" Allen nodded. "No. Each of you is free, and Wade will be in prison for many years." Suni was the first to cry. Kiana wrapped her arms around her. Ta, the strongest of them all, began trembling and could not stay on her feet. In their entire lives, there had never been a moment like this, a moment when their fates were no longer controlled by anyone else. Allen turned to Caleb. "You saved them just in time." One more day he did not finish, but everyone understood. When the deputies left, the 4 younger sisters quickly began making plans to return to the tribe. They missed the red earth, the beat of the drums, the warmth of the fire. Niali smiled at their joy, but her eyes, without realizing it, drifted toward Caleb. That evening, as the crimson sun spilled over the fields, Caleb went out to the stable to check the saddles for the journey back to the tribe. Niali approached from behind. "Do you think I will be going with them?" she asked, her voice gentle but enough to tighten something in Caleb's chest. He turned away, avoiding her gaze. "You should go. That is where you belong. It is safe there, and you owe me nothing." Niali stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm, stopping him mid-motion. "That is exactly why I want to stay." Caleb looked up. Her dark eyes now held a calm he had never seen before. No more fear, no more submission, no longer the sister hanging from a wooden post in the middle of a field, but a woman, completely free. "I am not staying because of what I said tied to that post," Niali said. "Not out of gratitude, not out of guilt. I choose because I want to." Caleb felt his throat tighten, and in that moment he understood that whatever they shared had grown beyond fear, beyond scars, beyond the limits life had once placed on them. Niali placed her hand over his chest. "You gave me back the right to choose. Now let me use it." And then in a voice as steady as the ground beneath her feet, she said, "I am staying." In the days after her sisters left the ranch to return to their tribe, Ironwood Ranch grew strangely quiet. Only Caleb and Niali remained, 2 souls bound by a choice they had not yet found the words to name. In the mornings, they worked side by side. In the afternoons, Caleb taught Niali how to ride, how to cut rope, how to read the wind. At night, they sat by the lamplight and spoke of things they had never dared to share before. And when darkness fell, Niali came to him willingly. Caleb was no young man. He was 50, had spent his life doing hard labor, and his heart had once been fractured by the death of his wife. But the fierce and gentle strength of Niali, and the new love growing between them, was something he could not deny. Night after night, they came together not just in body, but in a way that felt like rebirth. A kind of closeness life had once stolen from them, now returned in its truest form. But there was one thing Caleb did not notice. His body was no longer young. On one sweltering afternoon, as he hoisted a heavy sack of horse feed, a wave of dizziness struck him. His heart pounded like it was trying to break free from his chest. He tried to stay upright, tried to take a deep breath, but everything went black. The sack dropped. Caleb fell to his knees, then collapsed onto the dusty ground of the stable. Neely heard the sound. She ran, and when she saw him lying there, breath shallow, face pale, her heart felt like it was being torn apart. "Caleb," she cried, dropping beside him, cradling his head in her arms. His chest heaved once, then slowed. There had never been a moment in Neely's life that terrified her more. Not even when she hung upside down in the sun-baked field. Not even when Wade held a blade to her throat. do not leave me," she whispered, hands trembling as they stroked his hair. "You saved me from death. Do not make me watch you die." She pulled him from the dirt, rested his head in her lap, pressing her ear to his chest. His heartbeat was weak, but still there. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto his dust-covered skin. In that moment, Neely understood one thing with painful clarity. If Caleb died, she would lose the only person who had ever seen her as fully human. She was no longer the woman who once begged for her sister's lives with a broken voice. She was now someone begging fate itself to let her keep the man her heart had chosen. Neely lifted Caleb into her arms, trembling yet resolute. And that night, for the first time, their roles reversed completely. From the one who had been saved, she became the one who must save. Caleb remained unconscious for hours. The small room was lit only by the flicker of an oil lamp and the faint thread-like sound of his breathing. Neely did not leave his side for even a moment. She wiped the sweat from his brow, pressed drops of water gently to his lips, and kept her hand on his chest to feel the weak, fading rhythm of his heart. Through the endless night, she spoke without pause, as if stopping for even a second would let fate rip him from her arms. "Caleb, you have to listen to me. I am strong because you are beside me. If you leave, who will teach me to ride? Who will help me fix the stable door? Who will look at me without judgment?" She bowed her head against his chest, her shoulders shaking. Never in her life had Neely been so afraid. As dawn approached, Caleb stirred slightly. His eyelids fluttered before slowly opening. His vision was blurry, but then he saw the face of the woman so close to his eyes, filled with tears, yet burning with life. "You are crying." Neely let out a soft breath, half laugh, half sob. "If you can still ask that, then you are not dead." Caleb tried to move, but Neely placed her hand gently on his chest. "Do not. You are too weak. You pushed yourself too hard." And for her, Caleb gave a faint, sheepish smile. "I just wanted to keep up with you." That simple sentence made Neely's throat tighten. She sat beside him and held his hand tightly. "You saved me from death, Caleb, but if you had died because of me, I could not bear it." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "Neely, I have no regrets, not for a single moment." In that moment, every wall Neely had built came down. She told Caleb everything she had never told anyone. About the night her father died, about the debt that had been forced on them, about the men in town who had looked at her as if she were something to be bought. And finally, she said, "You are the first man who did not touch me because he thought I belonged to him. You touched me because I wanted you to." Caleb raised a trembling hand to her cheek. "Neely, if there's anything I fear, it is hurting you." Neely leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently to his. "You have never hurt me. You showed me that I have the right to choose the one I love. And I choose you." In that simple room, there was no more illness, no more old pain, only two souls, once crushed by life, now leaning into each other just to breathe. That night, Neely stayed by Caleb's side, not with fear of losing him, but with the quiet certainty that their love had been born from complete and willing choice. As the days passed and her sisters returned to the tribe, Ironwood Ranch settled into a deep, quiet calm. Only Caleb and Neely remained, two people bound by a choice that neither of them yet knew how to name. In the mornings, they worked together. In the afternoons, Caleb taught Neely how to ride, how to tie rope, how to read the wind, and at night they sat beside the oil lamp, sharing stories they had once kept buried in silence. And when night fully fell, Neely would walk to him on her own. Caleb was no young man. He was 50, worn from a lifetime of hard labor, and carrying the quiet ache of a heart once broken by his wife's death. But the fierce, tender strength of Nieli and the new love between them was something he could not resist. Night after night, they came together not just in body, but in something deeper. It felt like rebirth, a reclaiming of something life had once stolen from them. True intimacy. But there was one thing Caleb had forgotten. His body was no longer young. One sweltering afternoon, as he hoisted a heavy sack of horse feed, a wave of dizziness overcame him. His heart pounded like it was trying to escape his chest. He tried to steady himself to breathe deep, but everything went black. The sack fell. Caleb dropped to his knees and then collapsed onto the dusty floor of the stable. Nieli heard the crash, and her heart split open at the sight of Caleb lying there. Breath faint, skin pale. "Caleb," she cried, cradling his head in her arms. His chest rose and fell sharply, then slower. Never in her life had Nieli been so afraid. Not even when hanging from a wooden post under the desert sun. Not even with Wade's blade at her throat. "Do not leave me," she whispered, her shaking hand stroking his hair. "You saved me from death. Do not make me watch you die." She pulled him from the dirt, rested his head in her lap, pressing her ear to his chest. His heart beat weak, but still there. Her tears fell onto his dust-covered face. In that moment, Nieli knew one thing. If Caleb died, she would lose the only man who had ever looked at her and seen a human being. She was no longer the woman who had once begged to save her sisters. She was now someone begging fate to spare the man her heart had chosen. She carried Caleb inside, trembling but determined. And that night, for the first time, their roles reversed from the one who had been saved. She became the one who must save. Caleb slowly began to recover. Each day, he could sit up a little more, walk a little farther, then collapse again into Nieli's arms, making her laugh softly. And in those quiet moments, Caleb realized that since his wife had died, this was the first time he truly wanted to live because of someone. Once he regained his strength, Caleb took Nieli to the field behind the ranch where fresh green grass was pushing up through the red earth. The evening wind caught her hair, and she looked nothing like a woman who had brushed against death weeks ago. She looked like life itself wrapped in the form of a woman. Caleb took her hand. "Nieli," he said, voice deep but trembling slightly, "I thought my life was over until the day I met you." She looked at him with eyes deep as a midnight lake. "I used to think I was born only to endure," she said gently. "But you showed me what it means to choose." Caleb took a breath, then slowly knelt before her. And in that moment, a man who had lived half his life in sorrow became small before a woman who had once been hung upside down in a field. "I do not have much," Caleb said, "just this ranch, these hands, and this heart. But if you will have them, I want to give them all to you. Nieli, will you marry me?" Nieli raised a hand to her lips, not in shock, but to hold back the flood of emotion. She knelt down in front of him, took his rough hands, and placed them on her belly. "Caleb," she whispered, "you planted in me not just the warmth of a man, but new life." Caleb froze. You are pregnant." Nieli smiled, the most beautiful smile he had ever seen. Caleb held Nieli tightly, burying his face into her shoulder to hide the tears he had forgotten how to shed. And as they stood together, the crimson sunset washed over the field, witness to it all. Nieli placed a hand on his cheek, her voice light as wind. "I say yes, Caleb Ironwood. From this day forward, I am your wife. Not because of desperation, but because my heart freely and fully chose you." And so, in the very place where they had once faced death, they began a new life. A life built on freedom, gratitude, and a love that was real, because true love is not about who saves whom. It is about two people choosing each other once all the chains are gone. The love between Caleb and Nieli was not born from promises made in desperation, but from the quiet days they stood up from the wreckage and healed what the world had once broken. They did not choose each other out of fear, debt, or pity, but because of freedom. Their story reminds us that the most beautiful kind of love is not the one that fills a void, but the one that helps us become stronger, kinder versions of ourselves. And when two hearts choose freely, Even the deepest tragedy can be turned into light. News of the 5 Apache sisters disappearing from the dry field spread faster than the desert wind. Morgan Wade, the man who held life and death in his hands, completely lost his mind when he discovered his merchandise had vanished just a day before he planned to sell them to the biggest saloon in town. He roared at his men, "No one hides them from me. Search every field, every valley. I want those girls back, dead or alive." That night, under a sliver of a moon, Caleb was building a fire outside when the sound of horses thundered in from the distance. Red dust curled into the air beneath the moonlight. Caleb stood, eyes sharpening. He had known this day would come, and he had prepared for it. Silently, he checked the locks and glanced over the 5 sisters sleeping safely inside. "Is it him?" Neely asked, sensing the tension. Caleb nodded. "But we are not running. Not tonight," she whispered. Outside, more than a dozen of Wade's men surrounded the ranch like a pack of hungry wolves. Wade sat on his black horse, a wicked smile stretching across his face. "Caleb Ironwood," he bellowed, "hand them over. They belong to me." Caleb stepped onto the porch, a Winchester in hand, his stance not of aggression, but of protection. "They do not belong to anyone," he said, voice low but firm. Wade laughed cruelly. "Free? Apache, do not be stupid. I bought them from their father before he died. They owe me. And you are not big enough to stand against me." The moment Wade urged his horse forward, the shrill sound of a police whistle shattered the night. 20 town deputies appeared from the west, weapons drawn. Sheriff Allen rode at the front, pointing directly at Wade. "Morgan Wade, you are under arrest for kidnapping, torture, and trafficking of human beings." Wade's men panicked. He tried to flee, but a warning shot froze him in place. Neely watched from the window, her heart swelling with a feeling she had never known before. For the first time, a man stood between her and evil, not for profit, but for what was right. Wade was cuffed in Caleb's yard, face pressed into the dusty ground. Caleb returned inside and found Neely trembling slightly. "It is over," he said softly. "No one is ever going to hurt you again." For the first time since she had been hung from a wooden post, Neely felt truly safe. The next morning, Sheriff Allen returned to Ironwood Ranch with a stack of stamped territorial court papers. "We searched Wade's storage," he said slowly. "All the debt contracts tied to your tribe were forgeries. Not a single one is legally valid." Sunni, Kiana, Tala, and Alohi cried and laughed in relief. Allen turned to Caleb. "You saved them just in time." Everyone understood what he meant. The sisters returned to the tribe, leaving Ironwood Ranch quiet and calm. Only Caleb and Neely remaining, 2 souls bound by a choice freely made. In the mornings, they worked side by side. In the afternoons, Caleb taught her to ride, to read the wind, to tie rope. At night, they sat by the lamp, sharing stories, building a life together, and in the quiet intimacy of those evenings, love was no longer born of fear or debt, but of freedom, choice, and the courage to embrace life together.